All right, we are moving on here. In this week of atonement, last week of Christ's life on earth, we, we've talked a lot. I'll just kind of run through this because we've been there about his questioning by Caiaphas, Antipas, Pilate, Herod, back to Pilate, and Judas' suicide. We're down to the point now of Jesus on the cross and the things that are going on there. The journey to the cross was, of course, filled with issues. We talked quite a bit about that. I'll get there in just a minute, I promise. We talked a little bit about the stations of the cross last week and a little bit about that, which is kind of interesting. The pressing into service of Simon the Cyrene to carry the cross of Jesus, the top cross of Jesus, we believe that would be, not the upright cross. It never says that Jesus fell under the weight of the cross. We talked about that a little bit, but we make that assumption, and I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that assumption. But once again, it kind of gives you an idea how art and tradition influences our faith, you know. It's just almost hard for it not to, right? There's so much art, there's so many pictures we see, there's so many things that we see that it really gives us a picture in our mind of what it should look like. And, you know, that picture is not always that accurate, but it is a picture we hold because that's what we see. I know the Lord's Supper wasn't the Michelangelo version of that. It was or Leonardo da Vinci, whoever did that. Leonardo da Vinci. Wasn't the Leonardo da Vinci version of that, I know, but in my mind, when I see the Lord's Supper, that's the picture that always pops in my head, you know. It's just how it is. And but that's one thing I think as we look at Scripture, sometimes we see that it doesn't always exactly follow that. The women who are always close to Jesus, mourning and lamenting, they were always there, weren't they? You know, we miss that sometimes in the story of Christ, the influence that the women had on his life and his ministry, the support they gave to him. They were always there. Even when the apostles fled and he was being led away to be tried, the women were there. The women were always in the background. They were always there watching, looking. They were on the road as he went up the hill. Well, I don't know if John was on that or not. I know John was at the cross. I don't know that John was with them in this journey up to the Golgotha, up to where he would be crucified. I'm not sure if he was there or not, but the women were there. And the women were mourning and they were lamenting over what was going on and what was going to happen to him. And at the cross, the women were there at the distance. And after the resurrection, the women were at the tomb, and we'll see that. And then, you know, in Acts 2, the women were in the upper room. So, I mean, you know, they were a tremendous influence, not just financially, but support they gave to him throughout this, and we're always there. And sometimes we kind of forget that, and it'd be nice if we knew a little more about their role and exactly what was going on. This place they led him to with the two criminals to be put to death, the place of the skull they called it. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. If you remember right, in when Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, the wise men came with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? And we've always associated that with kingship and with myrrh with death, right? Myrrh with death. So it's kind of interesting how that comes back and kind of comes full circle as we get to this point right here. The two robbers crucified with him, and that comes out of Isaiah. And Mark brings that up. That's Isaiah 53. He was numbered with the transgressors. They crucified him, the criminals, one on the right, the other on the left. Him in the middle, we know that, and that's something I guess we have right. I don't think his cross was any higher than the others. Probably were all the same height cross, but you know, that's kind of another one of those things we really don't know. The superscription above the cross was something they did, and the other criminals would have had one above their heads too. That wasn't unique to Jesus. In crucifixion, in Roman crucifixion, they always put the name and the charge on the plaque above above them. So that wasn't unique. But it was unique in what was written. It was unique that it was written in 3 languages, not just in one language. It was written in 3 languages, which was unique. And it was, in the inscription was, Jesus, King of the Jews. And of course, we looked at John a little bit. It's kind of getting us back up to speed here this morning. We looked at John a little bit. It was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Okay? Hebrew was the language of the temple. Latin was the language of the law. Greek was the common language. And they were saying that do not write it King of the Jews, but I am King of the Jews. And of course, Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. And Pilate's going to wander off into antiquity here. We're not going to hear anything much more about him, a little bit, but not much more. Pilate's reign will be short-lived, a couple of years. Pilate will wind up coming to a bad end like most of the people in Rome did, governors did of his time. So, but he had a place in history, didn't he? A place that we still see. It's only Luke who gives us, Father, forgive them. We talked a little bit about that last time. So only in Luke we get that. They know not what they are doing. And that's the same thing that Luke records Stephen saying in Acts. When Stephen's being stoned to death, he says, forgive them. Don't lay this charge to their account. Depends on how you read it. But so that only happens in Luke's gospel. The lots for the garments is out of the Psalm, 22nd Psalm. It says they'll cast lots for my garments. So this is also prophecy, comes out of that Psalm, messianic prophecy. They divided his garments among themselves. And of course the cloak, the outer garment in John, the outer garments, the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots. And it was fulfilled. They divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. That's in the 22nd Psalm. So all these things, and especially at the cross, there's just such a tremendous amount of prophecy that's being fulfilled at the cross. And in the midst of all this pain and agony and anguish and blood and all the other things that are going on here, all this prophecy is coming to pass. So it's really an amazing time, and it's even going to convert, of course, the soldier who's standing. Of course, the 22nd Psalm says they're going to mock Jesus, so they're going to mock him. And once again, here we see that fulfilled. There's so much messianic prophecy in the 22nd Psalm. I'm going to go over there for just a second. If I can make my Bible flip. There we go. Let me get down here. For dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So you can kind of see this comes right out of there, right out of the 22nd Psalm that David wrote. And this is part of the 22nd Psalm too, part of the mocking. And if you read all the 22nd Psalm, that's in there too. Why doesn't he save himself, right? He saved others. Why can't he save himself? Why can't he come down from the cross? And of course, we know that he could have, but he chose not to. It's such a tremendous anguish here. I mean, his humanity, the human side, no way wants to go through this. No way wants to endure this. I mean, and from my perspective, I would do anything I could not to do that. And I don't know that I would have the strength not to just call for some help. At this point, I might want to call a friend. You know what I mean? But Jesus didn't. He endured it all the way through. And I think that's the amazing thing. It's not, so much what they did to him is the fact that he willingly did it. I mean, a lot of people went through this. He's got 2 guys on the sides of him they're getting the same thing. They're both getting crucified. But let's face it, they had no way out, right? Jesus had a way out. There's a big difference in that idea. The 2 men beside him, the two thieves, the robbers. Psalms 50 or Isaiah 53 said he'd be numbered with the transgressors and with the rich in his death. So this is the numbering with the transgressors, the two thieves who were convicted, rightly so, I guess. And of course, two thieves kind of represent the two ideas of humanity, right? Some accept him, some reject him. And I think there's probably a lesson in that. They were insulting him with the same words in the beginning. They were both doing the same thing that everybody else was doing, saying, "Get down from the cross. Why can't you save yourself?" But something changed. That's what I've always kind of pondered, actually. One of the criminals was hanging there, Luke says, hurling abuse. "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other answered, rebuking him, said, "Do not even fear God, since you're under the same sentence of condemnation, and we are suffering justly. But this man has done nothing wrong." So what do you think changed in this guy? What did he see that the other one didn't? What made him? They were both insulting him at the start, right? But something changed, didn't it? I don't know. I wish we knew, don't you? Why do some people see Jesus and see him the way that as a Savior and their salvation, and other people don't, right? Other people don't see him that way. There were things going on here, we know. Sky was getting dark, right? Earthquake when he dies. Of course, that may not have happened yet. There's things are happening. Maybe that thief is seeing all this. Yeah. Well, it might have been his attitude, the way he was doing it, the things that he said. Maybe he knew something about Jesus before they ever got to the cross. Maybe he knew something. Maybe he had seen Jesus or heard Jesus. We don't know. We just don't know the story of the thief, do we? We don't. And I think maybe that's on purpose, because his past really isn't going to matter, is it? He asked Jesus to remember him when you come in your kingdom. And whether or not he fully understood that or understood exactly what he was saying, I don't know. And Jesus answered, "Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise." Well, that's something we struggle with right there, exactly what that means, right? What does that mean, right? So he says, today you'll be with me in paradise, right? Why didn't he say heaven? Is paradise heaven? Because nobody went to heaven yet, right? Because we're still all Jews, aren't we? At this point, we're still all Jews. And Jews didn't go to heaven per se when they died. We spent some time talking about that. They went to Sheol. They went to the realm of the dead, Hades. And we know from the story of the rich man and Lazarus, there was two compartments in Hades, right? There was a compartment of torment, and there was a compartment of comfort. Remember, Lazarus went to where? The bosom of Abraham, right? There was no way to heaven yet because you had to be without sin to go to heaven. Hebrew writer tells us there was no forgiveness of sin, right? This guy's dying as a Jew. So he's going to go to where does Jesus go when Jesus dies? He went down, Hades. What part of Hades? Good part, bad part. Bad part, right? How do we know that? His audience. 1 Peter 3, right? It says he preached to those who are once disobedient in the days of Noah, right? So in the spirit, do we need to look at that? We should look at that. Right? He'll be numbered with the transgressors and with the rich in his death. Well, Joseph of Arimathea was the rich. I think the rich in his death, because Joseph of Arimathea. Well, yeah, I guess you could look at it that way too. You could. So in 1 Peter 3, it says, starting in about verse 20, it says, actually, I guess we're going to go to 19, don't we? 18. For Christ also died for sins once and for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who were once disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. So Jesus went to the place of torment, and he made proclamation. He didn't preach. I mean, it depends on the version of the Bible you read, but he made proclamation to them, basically saying, I did what I do. So when he told that rich man on the cross, he said, today you'll be with me in paradise. That's what he meant. You'll be with me in Hades. That's where the righteous Jews went, except I'm sure he went to comfort. I'm sure he wasn't going to go. I'm sure Jesus wasn't saying, today you're going to go with me to this terrible place of punishment, right? He's saying, you're going to be in paradise, the better part of that, right? You're going to be in the better part of that place. You're going to be in this comfort, Abraham's bosom. So when we see the thief on the cross, he was a Jew. All these people were Jews. And he was going to die as a Jew, and he was going to go where we go, to Hades, to the realm of the dead. Jesus hadn't divided that up yet, and that's why Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise, instead of saying, you'll be with me in heaven, or you'll be with me where God is, because that wasn't at this point. That was not going to happen. Are there any comments about that? Yeah. No, not under the law. When Jesus died, it was a new covenant. The Hebrew writer says, right, when the one who makes it dies, then it's a new covenant. So yeah, Jesus is still alive. We understand that. He's a living Savior. But when he died on the cross, that was the beginning of a new covenant. So the old covenant is done away with. But until he died on that cross, we were still under the old covenant. Right. And then we had this weird transition for 40 days that I don't really know I can totally wrap my head around, but nevertheless. Well, the new covenant had already been planned, but there was no church. The church hadn't started yet. That plan hadn't been laid out. So, I mean, yeah, Jesus absolutely came according to plan. But what you got to understand is that when Jesus died on that cross, the law essentially was done away with. The old covenant was done. It had been fulfilled. All this fulfilled that covenant. It was done. It was a done thing. Now we're under a new covenant. Now there was a weird little place in there, I got to tell you, between Jesus dying and between Pentecost. There was a weird little period of time in there that I don't know that I totally understand what all was going on there, but because it's kind of like the law was done and the church hasn't started, but anyway, right? Kind of a weird little point in history between those two times. But it was only a few days, right? Only in John does Jesus speak to his mother. John, that's not recorded in any other gospel. Only John's gospel, where he spoke to his mother and said, woman, behold the son, son, behold thy mother. We believe he was giving her into the care of John. Why wouldn't he give her into the care of James or Jude or one of his other brothers? Didn't believe, right? They didn't believe till after he was raised. So weren't there. I doubt very seriously that they were even there at the cross to even say anything to him. And traditionally, we believe that John took this to heart, and that John eventually will wind up in Ephesus in his old age. He's going to be exiled to Patmos, but he will wind up in Ephesus, and he will take Mary with him, and according to tradition, I don't know that is biblical, but according to tradition, he got her a house outside of Ephesus up on the mountain, and that's where she stayed the rest of her days. We went to to Kudasaki, Turkey. We went to Ephesus. We went to the house of the Virgin Mary. And whether or not that's really her house or not, I don't know, but that's what they say. So they said she had, and it's a really pretty little house up in this really pretty little wooded hillside. Really neat. Should have showed you some pictures, but really a neat little place. And suppose that's the house of the Virgin Mary. That's where she spent her last days. John apparently watched over her until his death. John lived to be almost 100 years old, we believe. So John was very aged when he died. So, but supposedly John took this to heart and took care of Mary throughout his life, made sure that she was taken care of. So it was a big thing. John took this charge seriously, as far as we know. Darkness, 6 to the 9th hour, right? That would be what? Noon to 3, right? So 6 to the 9th hour. Darkness over the, I always wonder what kind of darkness this was. This is a miraculous darkness, right? Do you believe that? You think this was a miraculous darkness? I kind of do. I don't think it was like really cloudy. I mean, I think it's, really dark clouds. But I think this is the darkness you could feel, right? It was a biblical darkness. You know, in the plagues on Egypt, when it got dark, they couldn't see anything, the Bible says, right? It was totally dark. You couldn't see anything. This was a biblical darkness. And I think that's what really converted a lot of the guard at the cross. I think these things that were going on is what made he come to the realization, truly this is the Son of God. This isn't normal. This isn't natural. This isn't a natural darkness. This is an abnormal darkness. And it says it fell over the whole land. And if you look at Luke says the sun was obscured. So you could take that to mean, well, it was really, really cloudy, or you could take it to mean something else. But I think this is a darkness that you could feel. You knew this wasn't normal. This was abnormal darkness. And I think that was convincing to a lot of people who were at the cross. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is Aramaic. So that's the reason and it's translated in the Greek, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's the very first line of the 22nd Psalm. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Far from your ears are the words of my groaning, the 22nd Psalm says. Said he was calling for Elijah. And they ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, let us see what Elijah will come to save him. Jesus cried with a loud voice, Fall in your hands and commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. Why is Elijah, why do you think he would call for Elijah? Why would they think he was calling for Elijah? Why do you think? What's significant about Elijah? Really comes out of the end of the Old Testament, right? And Micah says that Elijah would come before that great and terrible day of the Lord. Remember that? And they're still looking for an earthly kingdom, right? They're still kind of holding out that, hey, this is going to be. And so if that's going to happen, who has to come? Right? According to prophecy, Elijah. Now, Jesus said John the Baptist was the Elijah who was to come, right? But they're not believing that. They're still holding out for Elijah. And so they're looking for him. I think that's interesting in text because, Elijah was a different prophet, right? I mean, he was a really different prophet. He was a way different prophet, right? I mean, he was a wild man. Am I right? If you ever read about Elijah, he was a northern kingdom prophet, right? He was just an odd guy. He defeated the prophets of Baal. He ran faster than the chariot to get back, right? And she was after him. He went to the wilderness. He says, take my life. Ate angel food, went 40 days. One of the only 3 people in the Bible that we think went 40 days, a 40-day fast. He went 40 days to the mountain of God, right? God appeared to him, hid him in the cleft of the rock. Elijah was wild, man. Preached naked. He was crazy, right? That was what Micah prophesied. He says, before That's one of the very last prophecies in the Old Testament, is that Elijah will come before that great and terrible day of the Lord. Elijah will come. So they were calling, is he calling for Elijah? Well, Jesus already said, well, John the Baptist was the Elijah who was to come. But, of course, like I said, they're not still looking for something else. And so when he said that, he breathed his last. He died quickly, didn't he? The others were still alive. The other two people who were hung on the cross were still alive. The two robbers were still alive. But Jesus had died fairly quickly on the cross. And I think that was for good reason, because we had to get him in the tomb, for one thing. We didn't want to break his legs, right? Because that would have went against prophecy. The centurion and those who were with him, when they saw the earthquake, the things that were happening, became very frightened. Truly, this was the Son of God. Many women were there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus, ministered to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So there was a conviction in this. And that's what it says. When the centurion saw what had happened, he began praising God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds who came together for the spectacle, when they observed what had happened, began to return, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, seeing these things, Luke tells us. So we get the idea. I think Mark is really neat on the women. I like Mark. James the Less. There's 4 James really in the Bible, right? James the Just, James the Great, James the Less. So it kind of gives you an idea of who was there. James the Less, Joseph, and Salome. They used to follow him. There's a lot of women, like I said, a lot of women who were with him, who were traveling with him. So this is convicting. The darkness, the earthquakes, the ground shaking. Only in John do we get the piercing of the side of Jesus. No other synoptic gospel records that. When we look at John's gospel after this, we'll look at that a little deeper. But only in John's gospel do we get the piercing of the side, the burial of Jesus. When it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus, went to Pilate, asked for the body. Joseph of Arimathea, he'll be laid with the rich in his death, according to Isaiah. So that's the rich in his death. Joseph was extremely wealthy. He had a tomb no one had been laid in, which was very unique in those times because it was hewn out of rock, and they used tombs repeatedly. They just pushed people to the back and shoved somebody else in because that was expensive. So this was big. This was rich. To have a tomb that no one had been laid in, that he had carved for him, and then to give that to Jesus to lay in, that was a big thing. I think traditionally, what I really like about Joseph of Arimathea is traditionally there's some real neat folklore about Joseph of Arimathea, about Jesus appearing to him after the resurrection in his house. I'll try to bring that next week and share it with you. It's really quite interesting, some of the folklore around Joseph of Arimathea. He doesn't get a big mention in the Bible, but in folklore and tradition, he's got quite the deal, quite the little repertoire. So it's kind of interesting to look at Joseph. Interesting guy who did that. Who else is with Joseph in this, right? Nicodemus, right, who came to Jesus by night. So there are Jews who converted and who believed in Jesus. And Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean linen, laid it in his own tomb. If you look at Mark, the end of Mark here, it says, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph were looking on to see where he was laid. And that's an important verse because a lot of people say, well, they just didn't know what tomb he was in. I've heard that argument, right? They just didn't know what tomb he was in. But when you look at this, the Bible refutes that. It says they knew exactly where he was. They watched it happen. The tomb was hewn out in the rock, and a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away, and Mary Magdalene sitting opposite the grave. So we don't know. The rock was laid across it. It says they saw the tomb and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and perfumes, and on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. Now that's, of course, I spent a lot of time on that. And I don't know if you remember about how I think this didn't happen on Friday. And that's one reason I don't think this was a Friday. This is one reason I don't think this was a Friday. Because I think there was a high Sabbath. Thursday was high Sabbath. Friday they prepared the spices. Saturday they rested. Sunday they went to the tomb. That's how I think this happened. So I think our traditional view of that is wrong. And we spent some time on that. Because if you look at this, it says they returned and prepared spices and perfume, and on the Sabbath they rested. So if they put Jesus in the tomb, this really kind of backs up this deal. If they put Jesus in the tomb at dark on Friday night, that was Sabbath. There's no way they could have prepared the spices and rested on the Sabbath. There's no way you could do that. Wouldn't be possible. Because Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday night, and you can't prepare anything after that. So they would have violated the Sabbath. So it doesn't work. Just doesn't work. But if you move the Sabbath like we talked about and said it was a high Sabbath because it was Passover, and you make that on Thursday, then they put him in the tomb Wednesday night, right? Wednesday night. And then Thursday they would have done anything. Friday they would have prepared the spices. They would have rested on the Sabbath, would have been Saturday, and then Sunday morning they would have been at the tomb. So it makes a lot better sense. If we look, did I lose everybody on that? Do y'all remember us going over that? Okay. So anyway, on top of that, we got guards. And that's interesting too, because some people think, well, it was just temple guards. Because Pilate says make it secure. There's two ways you can look at that saying, right? Depends on how Pilate said it. He could say, you have a guard. In other words, you have your own guard. Go make the temple secure. That's one way he could have said it. Does that make sense? No, because there was a Templar guard. So he could have and they said, oh, we want to put a guard. We don't want him to get out. And Pilate could have just said, well, you have a guard. Go make it secure, right? Now, the other way we could have looked at it is could have said, I've given you a guard. You have a guard, my guard. Go make it secure. So it depends on how you read it or how the emphasis was. So what was it, right? What was it? Was it just temple guard? Was it Roman guard? Was it Roman guard and temple guard? Well, most people believe it was Roman guard and temple guard. There's a Gospel of Peter, which of course I know is not in your Bible and we don't consider to be inspired, but there is a Gospel of Peter, and in the Gospel of Peter, they talk about a Roman guard. So whether or not that's true or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting subnote that it does say that in the Gospel of Peter. It does talk about a Roman guard. Now I need to go to another slide. Where'd my wife go? Hello. Now we got to go to the other one. But anyway, in the Gospel of Peter, it talks about it being both guards. We like for it to be Roman. And the reason is because we feel like that they're more accountable, right? In other words, if a Roman guard failed, then his penalty would be death, right? Whereas if a temple guard failed, we don't know that his penalty would be as severe as a Roman guard. So it makes us feel better if we say it was a Roman guard. But on the other hand, the temple guard really didn't want Jesus out of that tomb either, right? So on the other hand, it could have benefited either direction. But most scholars and most people hold to the idea that it was temple and Roman guards at the tomb of Jesus to guard the tomb. We're about out of time, so I'll start this next one next week. Are there any comments? Thanks for your time.